Joining us again is Brian Germain. Brian, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me for a third time here. It's a great opportunity.
It is. We're glad to have you back.
So, tonight we're talking about emotional factors in aviation. So we spend so much of our skydiving lives learning about how the wing flies, how the body flies, and how to make all that stuff work. But the truth is that that's only part of what goes on in aviation. There's the physiological side of things. There's the cognitive side of things. So basically our thought process and how we kind of master that end of things. The organic component very much determines the outcome. So if you're not relaxed and focused, you're going to make a mistake. And the interesting thing is that, of course, I've been researching fear and its effects in highly provocative and dangerous situations for a long, long time. Psychology is my basic background, and I went to grad school for it. So I've been looking into what happens to that information. You watch a student, or in many cases an experienced skydiver, and they screw up. They had the info. They knew that they should have pulled the right handle before the left handle, and for some reason they didn't do that. So, it turns out that actually when we get really excited, we're in a different state of consciousness. And so as a result, the brain simply doesn't have access to all that information. So basically the idea is here, the human element, to take a look at why we have emotional impacts. Why do pilots make those fatal mistakes? Sometimes, sure, it's the lack of knowledge. Somebody didn't teach them how to bail out of a hook turn, but they taught them how to hook turn. Right? So that's a lack of knowledge causing the problem, and that's why I spend so much time on rehearsing bailout procedures for teaching people high-speed approaches. And then the other part of it is, of course, the knowledge, and then what connects the knowledge to the outcome is the rehearsal, the physical rehearsal of pulling handles, stabbing brakes, dropping front risers, all that stuff. It needs to be physically repeated over and over and over and over, so that when stuff's going down, when you're like really energized, think about right now we're in a safe situation. So if I teach you something, you'll be able to regurgitate it in a safe situation. But when you're looking at the ground, it's coming at you really fast. Your front risers are in your hands, and your face is blown back in the wind, and your eyeballs are getting big and red. What you have left is what you've rehearsed. And if you haven't rehearsed your bailout procedures, then you're certainly going to run into a big problem. So that's part of it. But then to take it a step further is panic. Just flat out, when people just do the wrong thing because they're in the state most commonly known as fight or flight. But the truth of the matter is that it's not just two possibilities, where we feel threatened, we feel unsafe, so we fight against reality, which is a force against force kind of thing. You think about pulling a handle and it doesn't come out, so you pull really, really hard. Your heart gets pumping really, really fast, and all kinds of physiological changes happen in your body to cause that. But fight or flight is not the only kind of response. Another response is to freeze, to hold still. And this is encoded in your genes. This is ancient stuff. Survival mechanisms, just like the fight or flight, but this one is hide from the predator. And of course, with our fascinating human species, very often we are the predator when it comes to we're actually attacking each other, which is kind of a drag. But either way, holding still and hiding can be what allows you to escape danger, and from a fitness point of view, it allows you to survive long enough to breed. And that's why this becomes so ingrained and deep.
I've done some quite a bit of training in aviation, and one of the topics that's come up more than once is kind of what you're talking about here, where let's say you have an aircraft emergency, there's going to be a few seconds when that emergency first takes place where you're almost in denial of it.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're talking about here?
Well, this is even more. This is I call it off the map. You know, you don't have an instinctual response for this situation. There is nothing to fight directly against. There's no way to run away. And here you are faced with this situation that you know is very dangerous, but you don't know what to do. And so you do nothing. And you do it with tremendous energy. You know, it's a contraction of every muscle in your body and every brain cell, you know, that stops functioning, basically. You hold still and, you know, like a deer in the headlights, and that's the enemy. I can't think of a whole lot of situations in skydiving where freezing would be beneficial. I don't know if maybe you can come up with one.
No.
You know, it's just not good.
We read about that happening every year, though, in the incident reports.
Yeah, man. You know, our brothers and sisters keep eating it because either we didn't teach them well enough, or we didn't teach them how to calm down, how to stay calm, not just, you know, in a crisis, but leading up to that crisis. You know, if you're going fast mentally, if time feels like it's going fast because there's new stuff going on and you're rushing around and you're a little nervous, maybe you're worried that, you know, you are jumping a parachute that's too small for you, and you're under canopy kind of a little bit on the edge already, and then something happens and you're not in that ideal state to respond correctly, and you have a much higher probability of going into the freeze state of mind, which has no answers, right? I mean, if holding still is the answer, great, you're golden. But if holding still is going to kill you, well, you're on train tracks headed that way.
So what can we do to avoid that?
Well, that's exactly the question I've been asking for a long time, and you know, of course, I can look to my own experience, being in situations where, you know, I was in highly provocative circumstances on jump run, the final jump of the X Games. You know, we're in first place by not too much, and so I'm kind of trying to keep myself as cool as possible, right, so I can perform. And this huge TV camera gets shoved in my face, and this microphone that says ESPN on it gets shoved in my mouth. And, Brian Germain, you're about to make the final jump. Looks like you guys might win if you don't screw this one up. Well, thanks for the help, guys. You know? And so this is where, you know, it's that kind of circumstances, and of course being under spiraling, you know, crazy prototypes that are out of control. You know, I found that when I respond correctly, it's because I went into the situation with a very kind of mellow, cool internal dynamic. So I would call it a low baseline arousal level. Does that make sense? So just kind of, I'm in balance. You know, I'm relaxed, I'm cool, I'm focused on what's going on, and I'm not adding anything to it. I'm not labeling, I'm not worrying about things that aren't here and now. I'm just kind of empty and ready for anything. So the question I would ask is, what increases our ability to be in that state? That completely empty-headed but fully open, you know, fully awake and aware state. And in all my searching, the one thing that I have found the most answers and the most powerful practice for this kind of situation is to sit on my ass and clear my head, and try to do that for as long as I can. Obviously, life calls us back. You know, you got to do your life, but you take time to walk away from that life, and you sit down on a rock and you park. You know, just like on a skydive, if you can't hold a base, if you can't hold still and relax, all the muscles that you don't need, you can't do a skydive. Well, what I'm saying here is that we need to develop our ability to do that mentally, not just externally, but internally. Let go of our thinking and be comfortable with the absence of thinking, which is really hard. Our entire Western civilization, and now it's, of course, spreading to all parts of the world, it's all focused on content, on desire, and then the acquisition of the next desire, or, I don't have enough money, so I'll just work harder and faster and never rest, and so as a result, we're kind of miserable. And, of course, we're not in the here and now. We're not in that kind of peaceful beach moment. Yesterday we were ground launching off of the big dunes on Monterey Bay, and the winds were perfect, just fantastic. And I did a bunch of really nice swoops down the hill, dragging one side of my body down the slope, and, Superman's onto the beach. It was great fun. And then I just kind of parked myself on top, and I just sat down on this little knoll watching everybody else launch, and just noticed that the absence of doing actually was revealing this whole new possible reality that is much more peaceful than when we're caught up in the doing. We celebrate, we do our skydives, we do our fun things, that's, the party mentality, but what balances that, what keeps it kind of stable and sustainable is our ability to, in between loads, walk away, have a seat, chill out. Being able to, in skiing, you go to the warming hut because you're too cold. Well, in skydiving, we do the opposite. We get too hot internally, because, let's face it, this is very provocative. It gets the juices flowing. The hypothalamus is overactive during the day when we're skydiving. It's creating heat in the body, accelerating our internal circumstances, and we don't have to try to speed up. It's there, inherent, pregnant in the circumstances. We need to do the opposite. We need to work consciously towards what brings me back into balance. Grab that jug of water in between loads, have a seat, chug some water down, have a seat, and just mellow yourself out. Clear your head so that when that malfunction happens, that thing that you didn't even see coming, the horseshoe, in the middle of the free fly dive, or that dude that drifted under your group, and there's this open canopy directly below you as you're tracking off. Your decision at that moment, you only have a second to make that decision. The appropriateness of your decision is very much predicated on how grounded you are internally at that moment. Were you feeling calm and cool and collected, or were you kind of on edge where the straw will break the camel's back? You're juggling too many balls mentally, you're trying too many new things at once, and you're just not centered. That's dangerous in everything.
What about the climb to altitude in the airplane? It seems like that might be a good chance to sit back and kind of close
Absolutely.
your eyes and focus.
Yeah. Well, the point is that there is no beginning and no end to that process. And yeah, when you're sitting in the airplane, that's one of the times when we have this moment of, I don't really have anything to do. So I can either use that time to tell the last dirty joke that I heard about the two lesbians and the alligator, or I can use this time to periodically, I'm not saying don't tell jokes on the plane, but, periodically chill out. You don't have to close your eyes. As a matter of fact, I prefer not to. I prefer to stay in the moment because I'm in an airplane. I'm in a dynamic situation already. I'm just trying to reduce the speed internally. And so I try to relax whatever muscles that are tensed up, and I just lean back on whatever's behind me and be as lazy as I possibly can, like a cat. And when it's time to go, I check my stuff over methodically and carefully and slowly, and I move to the door really lazy, like a ground sloth in the heat of summer, and I just fall out of the airplane. So I maintain that state of cool. That's this seminar. I realized this yesterday. I was given this talk here at Hollister yesterday, and I realized if I could just get across the idea, just be like the Fonz. then you'll get it. just do that.
So is this the topic that you were discussing there?
Yeah. Well, I did a canopy flight course, and I have learned that it's much more than just pulling toggles and front risers.
Mm-hmm.
That I can give the people all the information in the world, and they just can't put it together unless they can cool out. And I find when it comes to canopy flight, the pre-exit chill is what gives you a good skydive, the free fall. But when you get open, now you've got this whole new set of circumstances, and your adrenaline has been provoked. At the moment of pull time, breaking off, looking for clean airspace, tossing the pilot chute, hoping that you did your homework and packed the thing well, that you chose the design of the parachute well enough that it's going to open well. And you don't really know, and that uncertainty is what provokes us. If you put heart rate monitors and other things that actually measure your arousal level, your energy level internally, your sweating. They measure your galvanic skin response. When you sweat, you conduct electricity across your skin better just because of the salty sweat. Well, they took a look at all these things, and interestingly, beginning when we start skydiving, our point of fear when we're most provoked is just before exit. That's not a surprise. But for an experienced skydiver, you realize there's nothing dangerous about exiting an airplane, so we can maintain this comfort level. But when we pull, now it spikes again, and it's actually just as high as a newbie. I mean, obviously there's personal differences, but here you are throwing your pilot chute, not knowing what's going to happen, and it's opening. Okay, now it's open. Well, the thing is, you're currently at this point on drugs. You're on drugs that your body manufactures, called adrenaline. That's epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, which is a steroid hormone. All kinds of things pumped into your bloodstream that are affecting the state of your body. Your temperature physically is rising if you measure your body temperature. So here we are on these drugs that reduce our ability level, our ability to think our way through the situation, consciously, and to be graceful, and those, you watch a beautiful landing, the person is not nervous at that point. And so what I find works the best, for me anyway, and then a lot of people kind of ping back and say, yeah, that worked for me too, is to get open, you do your housekeeping stuff, whatever that is, loosening your chest strap, I highly recommend that, and getting comfortable. You look at your parachute, it looks fine. You look at where you are with respect to the landing area, you point in a reasonable direction. First, to avoid the oncoming free falls, right? So you fly across the jump run. And then when you see everybody's open, you head back. On your way back, you unstow your brakes and you bring them on down, all the way down near the stall point. So you slow down the airspeed. And then you lift your eyes and you look out at the horizon. And you take a deep breath in, and you let it out really slowly, and you just chill. And then you feel yourself kind of going back to home, that grounded state that everybody knows is the heart of their ability. It's the heart of your wisdom and your flow. All of it comes together because you're in that state. And so you spend maybe 30 seconds just chilling, pull high enough that you can do that for a while. And then as a result, your approach, your landing, everything is going to be that much more graceful and that much more awake. You're going to be noticing what's going on as it's happening, instead of kind of in this panic mode where you only have just a little bit of RAM left. You're not juggling as many balls mentally because you cooled yourself out. You don't have extraneous thoughts called worry, right? You're just doing what you need to do. What's the next thing? Well, I need to turn right. You just turn right.
So this is something you do on every jump?
Hell yes. Absolutely. I'm on an 81 square foot prototype. I need to be heads up. I'm jumping into a different landing area pretty much every time I jump. And I need to be that much more fastidious. Just because I've got 10,000 jumps or 11,000 jumps, it doesn't mean that I'm perfect. So when I'm paying attention from that relaxed state, I can do my job. But if I take it for granted and I assume I'm safe because I got a big fat logbook, that's when, when I find myself making mistakes that physically hurt, or mistakes that make me look stupid. It's just as bad. Sport is about looking cool too, isn't it?
So when you say, pull higher and relax, 1,000 feet, 500 feet? What do you mean by pull higher?
I personally, I'm fully inflated flying and done with my housekeeping when I get myself down to about 3,000 feet. I'm done with all of that.
How high are you pulling?
About 35, 36, something like that.
So
it just gives me that much more time to handle, a weird malfunction, because let's face it, little parachutes can do some pretty interesting things, and I don't know what it's going to be. It's unpredictable, and therefore I just would rather leave a little slack in the system, be that much further away from the edge, that point where I have to cut away. And I don't tend to cut away because I have time to fix stuff. I can have line twists and use 3 or 4 or 5 revolutions to sort it out, whereas somebody that pulls it at 25 or 2,000 feet, they're going to be chopping. And I'm up there jumping the rest of the day, and they're looking for their free bag. So it just makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you need that extra 500 or 1,000 feet of your free fall just to get that last point, well, maybe you need to work on your flying skill so you don't need that. we used to have a saying, because back in the day when I started, 7,500 feet was standard exit altitude. We used to say if you can't do it from 7.5, you can't do it. And so, we're cushed now. We got 13.5, we got 14, 15,000 feet. So what do you need that extra little, 5-second air bath that puts you in a higher risk category, and worse yet, it makes you more nervous. So you can't get that approach and landing that you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Traffic issues, people not seeing someone else and slamming into another canopy in the pattern, that kills people too. Quite often, we've lost. I've lost a good friend, Roger Nelson, from that. I've lost other people, and sometimes that's because people get that tunnel vision. So we tend to forget that fear tends to narrow our focus. So fight and flight, it's, let's say you get into a fight with somebody in a bar, which isn't something I tend to do, but when that happens, it's just you and him. There's nothing else in the room but that. When it's run away from that barking dog that's chasing you, you're just running, and it's all very linear consciousness, straight ahead, and your peripheral awareness goes to shit. And so here you are under canopy, nervous. You don't see that other guy because of that, and it causes catastrophes. So, this relaxation stuff and, Buddhist mumbo jumbo or whatever you want to label it, the truth is that if we don't do this stuff as skydivers, we're going to run into circumstances that we don't like. So it's not just so that we can free fall beautifully or land beautifully, it's so that we can survive. It's absolutely imperative.
Any other specific techniques you can offer?
Well, the breathing thing, it seems to be the most powerful of all. If you just relax your body, center yourself, don't be working physically, let's say, when you're sitting on the airplane. If you think about the dynamics of breathing, the diaphragm is what drives that whole system, right? Just at the bottom of your rib cage, you have a muscle, and that muscle is kind of like a dome-shaped thing. And it sits, like a positive dome sitting up. And when you inhale, it flexes and tightens. So that an inhale is actually a muscle flexion. So you think about somebody going, they're scared, right? Well, the opposite of that is the exhale. If you can find a way to spend a little bit more time in your day exhaling than inhaling, well, then you're not working so hard in life. The whole idea is to restrict your throat just a little bit. In yoga, it's called ujjayi breathing. So you restrict your throat just enough that it almost makes like a hissing noise. So it's very easy to slow down the rate of the exhale. And as a result, it keeps you breathing. Like in scuba, they say don't stop breathing. Well, it's just as important in skydiving. Throughout your whole approach, everything that you're doing when you're gearing up, don't hold your breath when you're trying to get your leg through that leg strap and make your face turn red. At no point should you restrict your breathing. But if you can keep your rate reasonable, so you keep your pace slow. I want to print up a bunch of T-shirts that just say 2 words, very simple, the little message to the skydivers: slow down. And if you do that, if everything in your day is slow and reasonable, you don't find yourself getting to the airplane where you're running with your rig over one shoulder, and as you're climbing up the steps, you're throwing the rig over the other shoulder and putting your legs on. That's panic. And you're setting yourself up for a situation where now you have to work really hard to cool out. And you may or may not, you get into Mullen's plane, you definitely don't have enough time to cool down before you get to altitude. You jump into DC-3, well, you got enough time for a nap. But either way, you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to let your cool go at any point. And if it does happen, acknowledge and honor the fact that it takes time to come off of any drug. And adrenaline is a drug. Give yourself that time, open high. If you land from a malfunction, maybe, take a walk, have a seat, chill out for a little while until you feel good, and then you got to get back on the horse.
Those all sound like good things for all skydivers. But what about professional skydivers who have a much more hectic schedule?
Well, they become really good at it. That or they have tragedy after tragedy, right, which doesn't work. But most instructors have the ability to stay cool, partly because they have to. The student is relying on them to be cool because they're borrowing their cool. A student doesn't know if is it okay to relax? Is it okay? Are we safe? I don't know. Is my rig supposed to look like this? I don't know. So it's the instructor's job to act calm. And the beauty is that according to the James Lang theory, you might want to do a little reading on this. It's interesting. William James, the father of modern psychology, brilliant thinker, philosopher, and basically kind of started the whole analysis of mind. His feeling was that emotion is not really, it gets triggered by a thought, but it's defined by the physiological state. Right? If the body isn't elevated in its adrenaline or overall arousal level, well, the brain wouldn't look at the state of the body and label it an emotion in the first place. So, in other words, if you can calm the body, the emotion is not so intense. Walking down a dark city street where it looks kind of sketchy, and there's maybe some people that live in boxes and some other dangerous-looking folks, you start walking faster. Well, you become more nervous because you're walking faster. Right? And so the only way then to calm down is to walk slower, to decrease your internal rate, your respiration, your muscle activity, everything. The needs of your body need to be sort of diminished so that you can cool down and see things clearly. And, of course, you do that and you look around and go, wow, there's actually nothing to be afraid of. And when it comes to city streets, of course, the person that looks unafraid is the one that nobody messes with, right? They figure he's got to be, packing a gun or something. But, if you're not scared, then you don't get messed with. And that's true about many things in skydiving as well. So I think that the instructor has, because they're forced into acting calm, they're able to increase the rate at which they decelerate, if that makes sense. You know, they run to the plane, they got all this stuff going on, they got 92 different things in their mind, making sure that the student's gear is ready to go or the tandem harness is all hooked up right, all that stuff. And then when they sit down in the plane, they go, you know, and from there, they go, okay, what's next? Nothing? Okay, let's relax.
So that's kind of the key word, relax.
Yeah. Well, it's relax, you know, kind of whenever you can, whenever you notice muscle tension and speed, right? Internal speed. And then it's focus. You know, once you relax, it's not about tune out. You don't want to go to sleep. You want to be focused. You want to notice on what's going on right now. You know, what's the sound of the engines? Did I remember to take my seatbelt off? Have I looked at my 3 rings lately? Where are my handles? Do I have a cutaway handle that's tucked back behind my main lift web? Where's my pilot chute? Is my flap open, right? All these things that fall under the category of what you don't know, right? You don't start exploring those possibilities until you just relax, stop, and kind of refocus your eyes and your mind on the present moment. And once it's time to go, you're in balance, you're ready, and you are prepared to enter what Csikszentmihalyi calls the flow state. He wrote a really, really good book on this that I think everybody should at least flip through. It's called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Totally rocks. It's right on the money. And it describes the skydiving experience to a T when you know how to do it. You know, at the beginning, you're not in a flow state. You're just in survival mode, right? Just like, what am I supposed to do? I can't remember. You know, I saw a really good example of the opposite of the flow state. Well, I don't know if it's the opposite or not, but it's certainly not a good way to go. There's some instructors that don't subscribe to the touchy-feely way of teaching that I do, and there's one down in Africa that's a little more forceful, and he's a good guy with thousands and thousands of jumps, but he's more in the idea of you just push them into the water, they'll swim. And he had a student that was scared, really scared, and she said, no, I don't want to jump. And he ended up pushing her out of the airplane. And here she is, static line student, parachute opens, all panicked. Oh, what am I supposed to do now? What am I supposed to do? I can't figure it out. I grab my toggles. Yeah, that's what's next. I'll pull her toggles down. Oh, what's next? I can't remember. Shoot, I can't remember. Oh, yeah, I remember. I let the toggles go, and I looked down to the right, and I grabbed the handle, and then I looked down to the left, and I grabbed that, and then I peeled the right one, and I punched the right one, and I punched the left one. She cut away a perfectly good canopy. You know, it's a flow state, but that's an unconscious flow state because her mental model doesn't incorporate all of reality, all of this context, you know, everything that is necessary to skydive. There's a buttload to know. So you can't really enter, it's kind of dangerous to enter into a flow state completely when you're first learning, but after a while, when you refine some degree of expertise with something, where you can let go of your thinking completely and just do it. You know, most skydivers, experienced skydivers, can go, yeah, totally, I know that feeling like on a four-way where I know to dive, and it's just bam, 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 and I don't even, it's like waking up when your audible goes off or you look at your altimeter, it's time, you know, that you were completely absorbed in this moment, but not unconsciously so. You know, you weren't lost like in a dream. You were driving this experience with your intent. But at the same time, there was no extraneous thinking at all. You know, there was just based on reality. This moment, what's going on? What do I do next? And of course, those words that I just said, that wouldn't happen. You know, it's just this bare attention. And we don't get there when we're unnerved before exit. You know, we don't do that under canopy when we're unnerved by a funny opening. We have to take the time to chill out, calm down, relax, focus, and then flow into it. Which is a great subtitle for a new book, Transcending Fear.
Is that in the works?
Yeah, no, it's complete. It's actually rolling off the presses this week.
Now, that's in addition to, you just released another book, didn't you?
No, that's this one. That's Transcending Fear.
Oh, what was the canopy and its pilot? Isn't that?
Oh, no, it's the parachute and its pilot. Yeah, that's been out for 2 years now. Of course, I keep adding new information to it, but yeah, that book's been out for a couple of years now, and it's been kind of the training manual for the course, because I've discovered that I fill people's brains with all this new info, and afterwards you're like, damn, how am I going to remember all of that? Well, there you go. Here's this big thick book. Just go back and reread it.
Where can our listeners get a copy of that?
Well, you can go to transcendingfear.com or transfear.com or canopyflightinstructor.com. I have a bunch of different bigairsports.com. It all connects to the same thing.
Okay.
But yeah, I just think it's a really a fascinating topic. I don't get into the gigantic process of writing a book unless I'm totally into it, because it's a big job. I wrote the book for me too. I'm flipping back through it all the time to remind myself when I get unbalanced. This is just information. It's not, ego stuff. That doesn't work for me.
And it's called Transcending Fear?
Yep.
And that will be available next week?
It's technically available right now because they're going to be completing it, it possibly as early as Thursday or Friday of this week. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I got a whole bunch of coming off the presses.
Now, did I hear right that you're working on a new instructional video as well?
I am. Yeah, that's where I'm headed this week, is to Colorado. A really great professional video editor and I are working together to finish this free fly instructional video. I released it a number of years ago. It's called Vertical Journey. But I wanted to redo it. Because there was a lot of stuff in there that was kind of old, and the old messages still hold true until you get into specific stuff like I'm wearing a sit wing suit. Remember those with the wing in the front and the wing in the back?
Yeah, I do.
You don't see those too much anymore.
No.
And of course those have specific needs. You can't, for instance, when you track off with this suit. Of course most of them were shorty suits. And back in those days, we were jumping barefoot with no helmet. You'd be tracking off with your bare legs, and you couldn't go very fast. And then you'd flare out of your track, and those wings would inflate and throw you into a backflip. So little things like that I had to include. But so I wanted to go back through and update it and refine it and make it, of course, a DVD where you can jump around different topics. Because I know how hard it is to learn to free fly.
Is Grandpa still going to be?
You saw the old one.
I own it.
Oh, yeah, right on. That's cool.
Is he gonna? Are we gonna see him again?
Yeah, but I'm not putting that stuff on again. No way.